Starting in verse 5, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judah, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And they had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense, and there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. Now skip down verse 36. We're going to read verse 36 and 37. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age, and this the 6th month with her, who was called barren, for with God nothing shall be impossible. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and we'll get into the message this morning. Lord, I do want to thank you again for the time we can take in your word right now. Lord, I pray that you will help us to be focused in on what you have for us today, Lord, not letting distractions that maybe are outside this room, not letting things that are going on in our lives take away from what you have for us today, Lord. I pray that you will speak through me now, Lord. Use this time. I pray this in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the book of Luke as we get into this, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page here, and then we'll get into the message. The book of Luke is written, obviously, by Luke to Theophilus. There is some debate. I found this interesting in doing some study on this. There's some debate whether or not the argument was whether or not Theophilus is a real person or not. I did a little bit of reading on that this week. There's one group that believes he was a close friend of Luke. The word Theophilus simply means lover of God. So, perhaps this is some friend of Luke's who is a born-again believer, and most agree that it was written to the Gentiles, which makes some sense when we look at why he wrote the book. The other side of the argument states that it wasn't written to one individual person, but was written to all that are lovers of God. And their argument is, well, this is more of a generic book written to new believers. Purpose of the book of Luke was so that whether it's one specific person or a group of believers, so that they could know. Again, either way, this is to a new believer. But remembering the times when this is written is as the gospel is being brought to the Gentiles. So not only are we talking a new believer, but this entire concept is completely new. It would be like someone getting saved who has never heard about the Bible. It would be like someone getting saved who has no idea. We've had some of those. I can think of one in particular right now that when they got saved, everything Bible. We often in church will say things from the pulpit like, "You've heard the story of Noah." They hadn't. We kind of take those things for granted if we've spent time in church. But with them, it was very much you had to teach them everything because they knew nothing. That's what's happening here. As the Gentiles, the gospel is coming to the Gentiles, this is all completely new. At this point, no one really understood from either side, the Gentiles or the Jews, no one really understood what, I guess if you can put it this way, what the rules were. Because this was all entirely new. It was still confusing. No one knew if they were saved by grace or if they had to follow the law. You read from Luke through Acts and Romans, and you see a whole lot of argument back and forth about that, because there is all sorts of confusion of, well, did they have to live by the Old Testament law? just, there was all this confusion. No one knew. So they're new believers. These are new believers and are hearing and being taught all sorts of new things. I mean, you want to talk information overload. They're having all sorts of new things, and I'm sure in part not knowing what to follow. Who's a reliable source and who isn't? Again, something we see with new believers all the time. They will very often get confused by other. They'll get confused by others who will come to their door. They'll get confused by other. I'm not going to say other. They'll get confused by religions that will come and try to bring them in because it's all new and they don't know what's a reliable source yet and what isn't. That's what's happening here is, they don't know what is and isn't a reliable source and who they're supposed to listen to and what rules do I need to follow and what things do I need to remember. It would have been overwhelming. Think about and I believe I have this later in the message as well, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but you think about the Old Testament law and how involved and how difficult that was. If you are a Gentile believer who's thinking or who's being told by some, you have to learn and follow all of those, I mean, think of how overwhelming that would be. I have a hard time remembering my address. You want to give me, all of these new laws that I have to try to memorize, and not only memorize, I have to try to live by? I mean, it's going to be overwhelming to figure those things out. Anytime you're learning something new like that, it is. I remember when I started one of my first jobs. It was in a lumber yard. I was 15 years old and driving a forklift, loading trucks and semis with lumber, and it didn't take very long. It didn't take very long before I had figured out what everything was and where it was. But at the start, it was overwhelming. Lumberyard was nearly 10 acres worth of piles of lumber everywhere. I remember the first few days, you'd be on your forklift with a radio, and all you would get is from the office a call on your radio saying that an order had been called in, and you'd drive your forklift up to the front, they'd hand you a slip of paper. And I remember my first few days looking at the slip of paper thinking, I have no idea where any of this is, and I'm about to have a customer follow me all around this place just driving circles trying to figure out what it was. You had to have it all memorized. The first day, they walked me through and pointed out what everything was. But good luck trying to remember all that. And you have all the different sizes of lumber and different kinds of lumber, and that was what tripped me up the most. Not only do you have the fact that a 2x4 is not actually a 2x4, it's a 1.5 by 3.5, which is dumb, but not only do you have that, but then you have not all 2x4s are created equal. I have you right in the front. You understand this. Not all 2x4s are the same. They make 2x4s in different kinds of wood. You have no idea how many times I loaded somebody's entire truck up with lumber, and they were like, oh, I wanted cedar, that's pine. Perfect, let me unload all 200 of those and we'll try again. I mean, it was great because I had no idea. It was overwhelming at first to figure out what is all of this. That is not even remotely as challenging as it would have been for these new Gentile believers and what they would have been facing to a way bigger scale. More than just a bigger scale, what they're trying to learn affects their eternity. I mean, what I was trying to learn affected my job. What they were trying to learn affects their eternity. So much new information, it would have been, too much to try to understand it all. So Luke says, here's what I'm going to do. And I know we kind of skipped over the first 4 verses, but verse 4, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. He's writing the book of Luke, and I know we're still kind of in this introduction to understand the book. He's writing the book of Luke so that they can know with a certainty. Here's what you need to believe. Writing the book of Luke so that there is no question. I don't know about you, but I take a lot of comfort in the fact that I can know some things with certainty. That there's no question. There's no doubt about them. You can ask my wife. I like to know things with a certainty. I don't like surprises. I don't like not knowing. Lisa and I had only been married a couple of years at this point, and one year for my birthday, this was before she figured out I don't like surprises, she decided she was going to throw me a surprise birthday party. So she had one of my friends distract me for a little while, and maybe this is where things took a wrong turn, but she had one of my friends distract me for a little while, and the way he distracted me was he took me to help me do my taxes for the business. You know, that's a great way to relax before you're going to be surprised at your house. So that was, you know, oh, I need to distract him for a while. Let's go do taxes together. That's what he did. So, you know, that puts you on edge anyways, but, you know, she had arranged it all, and so that he was going to take me and distract me for a while, and while I was gone, a bunch of people came over, so that when he and I drove back, which probably also didn't help because we weren't done with taxes, and then he's like, oh, we should go back to your house. So now not only is my brain on that I'm doing taxes, now my brain's on they're not even done. Like, I'm stressed and they're not even done now at this point. We go, and there's all these cars parked in front of my house. And I was distracted, but I was cognizant enough to know it's my birthday or close to it, and I recognized all of those cars, and I figured out what was going on. And it took a whole lot of convincing from my friend to get me to walk inside. I tried to convince him to keep on driving and just wait until they all left and got bored and went home, and then I could go home, because I don't like surprises. I don't like not knowing what's going on. But in life, there are a lot of things that are that way. In life, there are a lot of things that are uncertain. But I don't have to be uncertain about the things of God. I don't have to hope about anything when it comes to God's Word. You know, we use that phrase. We use that phrase in regards to salvation a lot, that I don't have to hope that I'm saved because I know that I'm saved, which is an accurate statement. But that's true about more than just salvation. We can know with a certainty wherein we have been instructed. So I want to approach this morning's message. You can tell I normally preach Sunday night and Wednesday night because when I'm typing this up, I type tonight's message. This morning's with this concept, knowing the certainty, and knowing with a certainty that with God nothing is impossible. We read that in verse 7, for with God nothing shall be impossible. What a statement that we have there. Because with man, there are all sorts of things that are impossible. If you think about it, we have limitations, lots of them. We have limitations. It doesn't matter how skilled a person is. It does not matter how successful a person is. It doesn't matter how much ability that a person has. He only has so much. Few examples. You take an athlete, for instance, and when I was studying for this, I thought of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, by many, is thought to have been the best basketball player of all time. I know there's some that try to argue that perhaps LeBron James has passed him, but I think the best sign that Jordan was still the greatest is everyone's career is still compared to his. He dominated the sport his entire career, regarded by most to be the greatest of all time, and yet he had limitations. At one point in his career, and some of you, this may not matter at all, some of you already know this, at one point in his career, he decided to walk away from basketball and follow his dream of being a professional baseball player, thinking, I'm dominant in one sport, I can be just as dominant in another. But his baseball career was mediocre at best, so he went back to basketball because he had limitations. Humans do. And because of our limitations, there are all sorts of things that are impossible for us. All sorts of things that maybe we would like to do or that we wish we could do, but are impossible for us. I'll give a goofy example, but it's not true. We have limitations, or not untrue, sorry. We have limitations. I think it would be awesome to fly like Superman. Apparently, that's one of my limitations. I mean, what a cool ability that would be to have. Traffic problems, they're gone, you know, I'll just fly over the top of them. But I don't have that ability. It is a limitation that humans cannot do. But with God, nothing shall be impossible. I'm not saying you can fly. But he doesn't have the limitations that I do. Now, all of that was a longish introduction into the context of the message, because often we take verses like this, and the reason I wanted to give kind of the background of Luke and this context is the reason we often take verses like this, like verse 37, that with God nothing shall be impossible, and we rip it out of context so that we can say, with God nothing shall be impossible, so I can fly like Superman, right? No, we'll take it out and we'll fit it into what we want. So I want to look at this in the context of what's happening here. Let's look at this verse, with God nothing shall be impossible, in the context. Number one, I want to see a prayer made possible. We already read verse 5 through 13. I'm going to have us read it again. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judah, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinance of the Lord blameless. And they had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren. They both were now well stricken in years. It came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense, and they appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing in the right, or on the right side of the altar of incense. When Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear a son, and thou shalt call his name John. We'll get into the specifics of the prayer sort of in a few minutes. But let's just park here for a minute. Zacharias has been praying to God. This is something that is personal. It is a big deal to him. So I'm sure this wasn't a one-time quick prayer and move on. But now he's here going about his normal duties. Passage gives us that he is a priest whose job is to light the incense. It was a day like any other day. You know, I can picture Zacharias in the temple, and he's going about his work like we often do. You know, he's just kind of head down doing what you always do. When your job is the same task every day, we kind of get in this, zoned out that I'm just going to go about what I have to do to get through my day. You know how it is, and work is the same way. You just kind of coast through it, I guess might be the right way to put it. Maybe that's him here, that just in his routine that he always does, when suddenly an angel stood in front of him and it scares him. That's obviously not normal. I mean, that's not how his standard day at the office for Zacharias goes, which is obvious by the fact that his reaction is fear. You think about the priest's job was a pretty dangerous job. If you did it wrong, you died for it. No one had ever done it wrong and lived to tell you how they got let go. Like no one had gone through this and been able to explain what's going to happen. They just did it wrong and were struck dead. So you're doing your job that is that way, that if I mess this up, God strikes me dead, and an angel of the Lord appears in front of you. I have to think what's going through his mind is, what have I done wrong? Yeah, this is it. Get ready to jingle those bells on my ankle, because they're going to be dragging me out. Here we go. What have I done wrong? Racking your brain, try to figure it out. Like when a police car pulls in behind you, you immediately start thinking of all the things you might have done wrong, or how you're going to explain what you did wrong. Even if you were driving perfectly, you're nervous because, well, maybe I broke some law that I didn't even know that I broke. I could see Zacharias doing that here. That, boy, what did I do? And replaying in his mind, okay, I lit this, and then I did, and then I, trying to replay in his mind, what could I have done? But then the angel appears to him, and he's told, your prayer is heard. Now, I know that Zacharias was the priest. I get that part of his job was going to God on the behalf of others. But none of that changes the fact that any time a man goes to God and God hears and answers him is an amazing thing. I know I've brought this up in messages before, but that a limited man with imperfections and failures and faults can bring a request to God, and a perfect, limitless, all-powerful, all-knowing, almighty God hears and answers is a miracle every time. I often think that the people will, I wish it could have been like days of old where they could see miracles happen, and I think, has God ever answered a prayer for you? Because that's a miracle. The fact that God, being who he is, would listen to me, being who I am, that's a miracle every time. It's a miracle every time. It doesn't matter who the person is. The fact that God hears our plea and our requests is proof that with God nothing is impossible. A couple of notes with that. There is no reason that God should listen to you or I. This sounds harsh. I don't mean it that way, but we're insignificant. When compared, I already kind of mentioned this, when compared to God and who he is, we're insignificant. You think of Isaiah when he is in the presence of God and he sees God high and lifted up and he sees himself, and his response is not, boy, I deserve to be here. It's, woe is me, for I am undone. Isaiah is saying, I am insignificant. We have no merit that deserves that God give me the time of day, and yet he does. There's no benefit for God to listen to me. I do not even in the slightest consider myself a great orator. You guys probably notice this as well. When I'm up here preaching, I notice Andrew's in college and career right now, Andrew and I were talking about this, things about yourself when you're preaching that drive you nuts. And I recognize some. I'm not going to say them because then you're going to notice them all. I almost did. I'm not going to. But I notice them when I'm preaching and think, ooh, I need to stop doing that. And then I do it again. And I'm preaching to you. And while I am, in my head, I'm going, oh, I did it again. It's frustrating. I don't consider myself a great orator. I think that often God does that on purpose so that we remember that it's him and not us up here. But you could get the best speaker